need a bigger print? You can manage that.
No, I'll not read. I'll speak.
Very good morning to all of you and Happy New Year. This is a good new beginning in the semester, and we have with us our own chairperson, Prof Vivek Kumar, to deliver the first colloquium lecture for 2019. I would like to introduce, even though this is very familiar to all of you, I have to say a few words as introduction. Professor Vivek Kumar is a professor of sociology, public intellectual, and currently is the chairperson of Center for the Study of Social Systems, ANU. As a recipient of the Fulbright fellowship, he has taught at the University of Columbia Department of Sociology in the year 2012, and he has been a visiting faculty at the Department of Asian and African Studies, Humboldt University, Berlin, Germany. His areas of specializations include methodology of social sciences, sociology of marginalized communities, sociology of Indian diaspora, sociology of globalization, social movements and social change. And also he has been working quite a long time on the question of Dalit leadership and political assertions in India. His publications include Caste and Democracy in India, Perspectives from Below,
the seats that side.
Dalit Assertions and New Horizons, Dalit Leadership in India, and Dynamics of Change and Continuity in the Era of Globalization, Voices from the Margins. He has been writing frequently in newspapers and appearing in television debate on current affairs related to caste and the question of identity in India. And he is also the chairperson in charge of the Ambedkar chair at the Center for the Study of Social Systems. And today's talk, titled Classical Theory and Beyond, Rationale for a Dalit Perspective, it actually lingers around the key thinkers in sociology such as C.W. Mills, Berger and Lippmann, Pierre Bourdieu, and Paulo Freire, and from their works and key concepts, how a Dalit perspective can be evolved and can be articulated in the context of looking at Indian sociology and the socio-political questions related to identity in India. I think I welcome Professor Vivek Kumar. Please.
Thank you, all of you. I think a very good morning and welcome to the Center of the Study of Social Systems. I think there are many new faces as well. Those we have to welcome them formally. But it's always challenging to speak in Thursday colloquium, and when professors also sit together, usually our victims are always our students, but it's very difficult to I think, friends, this topic, Dalit perspective, emerged from my teaching in the center, especially my methodology classes, and my students who have been those who have taken my course. I think they will be very familiar in this, because as Ritish very promptly argued that it works on works of C. Wright Mills and others, but I'll go a little bit further, that how I started conceptualizing this. Of course, this was a homework given to me by Indira Gandhi Open University. They are coming with certain volumes, and in which they wanted my perspective on this So Dalit perspective, I started, understanding, or I started conceptualizing this while teaching sociology, and this came to me from the Weberian notion that there is a concept of value-free sociology. Can there be a value-free sociology? And then I started looking the different, different ways in which sociology has evolved over the years. And I found 7 shades of sociological perspective, ranging how it started with. So I started asking questions that why is it that in French sociology positivism is so writ large, and why Newtonian physics really has helped the notion of positivism, and why in German sociology it is interpretation, why Kantian understanding of reality is writ large in German sociology. In British sociology, I find that there is Darwinian biology which is dominating, and there is, analogy with that. Russian sociology is dominated by Marxism, and American sociology is dominated by reforms and functionalism. And then I started reading, of course, Japanese sociology after 1940s, that how they went into the empirical, as Mills would argue, they were trying to build on raw empiricism, and how that raw empiricism dominated Japanese sociology, and then they evolved. And when I came to Indian sociology, I saw that how Indology dominated in the initial stages, and how Indian social order, Hindu social order, all brought out from the Indological perspective. I've become really... I thought that this Thursday first, so let us... So these 7 shades of sociology prompted me to look that there can be another way to look at Indian sociology itself, that whether it is only Indological perspective that we can go through, or there can be another way to look at Indian society and sociology. And that's what actually started my research. So, to begin with, I will like to argue that, the initial stages, how this collectivity called Dalit was understood. A very mechanical way to understand Dalit was that they are the people, or they are the collectivity which needed policy, which suffers from illiteracy, atrocity, untouchability, and that is the way, ICSR projects one after the another try to understand. Nobody thought that they are also, society within themselves. They have their internal categories. They have their own men, women, youth, their own culture, their own value system, their own icons, and so on and so forth. So nobody tried to look that way. And therefore, I thought that, yes, there is a case, there is empirical data to build upon, and I started with. So I will begin by defining who are Dalits and how we can really understand the contours of this population. We have, in our sociological vogue, we have people try to define Dalits from very different vantage points. Some people call them poor people, some people called as oppressed, depressed, but, nobody has tried to evolve a sociological characteristics to understand this population. Some people may call it as essentialism, but I think it's important to evolve a definition, and I am very fond of, defining or definitions in my classes as well. My students get bored about my definitions. So, to begin with, we can define a group of people as Dalit with the following characteristics. One, their unique structural location in the Hindu social order. That is one of the most important characteristics, and I will elaborate on that. Unique structural location in the Hindu social order. Second, cumulative social exclusion. They suffer because of their structural location. And cumulative, I just forgot to bring my PPT, otherwise I would have shown you that I have tried to make this table where I have tried to show how 46 types of exclusion they suffer. And there may be many, but as a sociologist, as an observer, I could observe and collect these types of exclusion. Structural location, unique structural location was one, cumulative exclusion, and yes, this is history, long history of social exclusion. They have suffered long history of social exclusion. This history is not a year old or a 10-year-old, decade-year-old or a century, but it is said that it is millennium-old history. And therefore it's very important to take note. So these three: fourth, unalterable social status or identity. They suffer from, they have an identity and this is unalterable, even though they achieve economic and political or educational mobility. They remain the same. And out of these four characteristics, there is unique construction of consciousness anchored in historicity, social exclusion, as well as structural location. And because of that, they have evolved their own icons like Buddha, Ravidas, Ambedkar, and so on and so forth. And they have also started evolving their own culture, like evolving their own symbol, Jai Bhim, celebrating their own icons on 14th of April, 6th of December, or Buddha's conversion, that is 24th of October, so on and so forth. And this cuts across the caste and linguistic boundaries, and that is why these characteristics give a collectivity which is different from tribals, and especially they are different from women. Some people have tried to include women also in Dalit category, but I don't include them. I'm talking about group of people which have these 6 characteristics. Having defined this, was there a demand to understand Dalit society or Indian society from this perspective? That was the question. And I think there are few social scientists who have helped me to look into that. There is. I bring in Parvathamma, C. Parvathamma, who argued that in all his writings, and I quote, in all the writings of Srinivas, the Brahman and non-Brahman values are juxtaposed. The third group, which is rather sizable, the Harijan, however, do not figure in the discussion. Similarly, Uman argues that all the available evidences suggest that Indian sociologists and social anthropologists have largely neglected the social realities of the lowly placed and the oppressed, particularly scheduled castes. Further, Uman argues that this is not simply a matter of praxeological aberration, but also that of theoretical neglect, a product of cognitive blackout. Reggae also highlights erasure of Dalit intellectualism in the social science curricula. And secondly, she argues that there is a lack of serious engagement with the Dalit feminist critique in the social science. I, myself, Vivek Kumar, has also tried to argue that how Indian sociological curriculum is devoid of reflexivity and pseudo-inclusivity. So there are a number of social scientists in India. They have tried to argue that, the sociology as practiced in Indian society or in Indian discipline, lacks the totality of understanding of the Indian society, and it is coming from a particular perspective. Now, it is here that, I started looking at that, can there be a rationale of Dalit perspective? Because there have been questions, and many of the social scientists in this room itself have vehemently argued, no, anybody can write about Dalits. Dalits cannot write only about Dalits. Anybody can write about Dalits. And, they have tried to argue. But when I started looking, these authors, especially Dalit's perspective, started drawing its strength from four sociologists or social scientists. One is C. Wright Mills, the person who wrote Sociological Imagination, and we have been taught sociological imagination again and again, but when it comes to understanding Indian society from the different perspective, then it is not at all taken into consideration. So what Mills argues, why it is important to look at it, and my students will bear me out because it is repetition for them. Mills argues that social science deals with problems of biography, of history, and their interaction within social structures. That these are three, biography, history, and society, are the coordinate points for the proper study of man. And this is the platform on which I have stood when practitioners have abandoned the classic tradition. Mills further argues that the life of an individual cannot be adequately understood without reference to the institution within which his biography is enacted. Much of the human life consists of playing roles within the specific institutions. Now, to understand the biography of an individual, we must understand the significance and meaning of the roles he has played in this institution, in these institutions. The roles they play in the institution is a very, very important argument. And not only that, he goes also beyond that, and he says that in particular, the roles will give us a psychological feature of man. In particular, his self-image and his conscience, and indeed the very growth of his mind, how his mind grows. I think these are very important coordinates when we start developing a Dalit perspective. So biography becomes important, history becomes important, and their interaction in the social structure. And when I define social structure, I take it social structure as permutation and combination of roles and statuses distributed in a society. What are the roles and statuses which have been distributed and legitimized in a society? Of course, it is from S.F. Nadel. Not only that, this is one aspect which really, which lays the foundation of Dalit perspective, that biography of the Dalits, their history and their interaction in social structure gives them a consciousness. It's a specific type of consciousness. I will come to that a little bit later. The second person who helped me to lay down, or the second combination, I have taken it from Peter Berger and Lockman. So they were talking about, of course, they are talking about sociology of knowledge. And according to sociology of knowledge, sociology of knowledge, according to Burgeon and Luckman, I quote, sociology is concerned with relationship between human thought and social context within which it arises. It may thus be said that the sociology of knowledge constitutes the sociological focus of much more general problem, that of existential determination of thought as such. Existential determination of thought as such. I think a very valid point, that how your existential determination of thought is basically constituted. I think they were talking about that reality is socially constructed. And of course, reality, we understand that how you have the contours and tangibility of a phenomena, that is what is reality according to them. Now, it is in this context that, the third person which helps us, or we can apply this in the Indian society, but before doing that, I will argue that Bourdieu is a very, very important social thinker, which helps even to strengthen the argument of Dalit perspective. And he is, looking again the history and capital, and he talks about that social world is nothing but accumulated history. Social world is nothing but accumulated history. And I think this is something, a very important point to begin with. What is the social word for the Dalits? That I will come, a little bit late. But just to put the things in perspective. Now, according to him, it is in fact impossible to account for the structure and functioning of social world unless one reintroduces capital in all its form. Usually, Marxists have tried to introduce capital only in one form, and that is economic. And economic theory has tried to explain, which can be translated into property and other things. But he says that no, there are other aspects of capital as well, and these are cultural capital and social capital. Now, cultural capital can exist in three forms: embodied state, or cultural capital can exist in three states: embodied state, objectified state, and institutionalized state. Now, if you look embodied state, this is accumulation and dispositions. How people, and in objectified form, he argues about the pictures, books, dictionaries, instruments, machines, and so on and so forth. And the institutionalized form, of course, is the form as we talk about, education, how the institutions. So now, the important point here is that how do you define capital? People have tried to define capital in economic terms, but he talks about that capital is nothing but accumulated labor. So capital is accumulated labor. It takes time to get accumulated and appropriated. Now, what is the impact of this cultural capital? He says that once appropriated and monopolized, it gives energy to the people who really monopolize it. It gives them extraordinary energy. And therefore, it is important to take note of cultural capital. Now, in social capital, he says that social capital is aggregate of durable networks of more or less institutionalized relationships of mutual acquaintance and recognition, or in other words, a membership in the group which provides each of its which are backing collectively and their own collective capital. Now, these are three very important points. These three thinkers are very important when we start operationalizing, these thinkers in the Indian society. How, what does it give us? I made this, this structure Now here, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and I've made actually, untouchables a little bit, giving gap because it is symbolically, because they are not part of the Hindu social life. They are away. And therefore, the social exclusion which I tried to look into, I tried to evolve that. The 46 types of exclusion which they suffer. Now, when you operationalize biography, history, and their interaction in social structure, when we talk about sociology of knowledge, that reality is socially constructed, and we talk about social and cultural capital, here are the people who emerge out of accumulation of cultural capital. Their construction of consciousness is shaped by accumulation of cultural capital. And here, the people, their construction of consciousness is shaped by exclusion of cultural capital. And I'm talking about cultural capital, of course, the book view of the cultural capital, that great tradition of the Indian society, the Vedas, Vedangas, Smritis, and whatnot. All this here. And then laid down on that, the lifestyle, the Purusukta, 10th Mandal, the Yagopavit, and all that actually I'm talking about the cultural capital. How people are actually. Now you can definitely question that, then what about our education? Whether our education system help us to evolve from our primordial identities and primordial realities. Now my take on this for explanation was that yes, of course, education helps people to emancipate one from the primordial identities and of course their realities. But for to happen that, I think the curriculum should contain those types of elements. But what is the curriculum? Curriculum reinstates the hegemonic value system. It is again taught that Veda, Indian society, Veda, 4 Varnas, and 4 Varnas come out from Vedas, and Vedas actually are infallible, and therefore it cannot be broken. The system should remain like that. Now, if this is the way the curriculum is infested with the hegemonic elements, then how can one emancipate oneself from our local or from our primordial identities? And that is why I feel that actually that this location is very important for the production of knowledge. Now, when I come to operationalize it in Indian society, I looked at certain classes are, or upper strata, the twice born, so-called twice born, they are basically, if operationalize the forced structure in Indian society, what are we going to get? Especially in the realm of production of knowledge. And production of knowledge, I think research, production of creative literature, and what all. We can observe that there is intrinsic relationship between individual's structural location and the production of knowledge. It is so because individual is socialized in the social, historical and cultural milieu which shapes his consciousness, and out of this consciousness production of knowledge takes place. In other words, individual's location in the social structure has a bearing on the construction of consciousness shaped by his or her life chances. These are again important, classical thinker Weber talks about that how life chances determine individual social action. And I'm not going into the, methodological individualism. I'm talking about how life chances are shaped in methodological holism, that is supra-institutions. And within supra-institution, that transparency of the individual to look beyond his or her benefits, what is going to benefit them and how they start performing their social action, though they are individual, but they are performing that action within the supra-institutions, which is, of course, according to the Durkheimian perspective, is the combination of individuals. Now, therefore, it is important to understand that Dalit perspective is required to understand the social reality. Why? Because the production of knowledge on the Indian society has been from a particular vantage point and from a particular structural location and their construction of consciousness. Now it is here that I bring in Freire, Paul Freire, and who talks about in his Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he says that the pedagogy of the oppressed makes oppression and its causes object of reflection by the oppressed, and from that reflection will come their necessary engagement in the struggle of their liberation. In the same vein, Freire also argues that the pedagogy of the oppressed cannot be developed or practiced by the oppressor. It has to be developed by the oppressed, and that is why there is a need. There is a need of pedagogy of the oppressed. And I call it as Dalit perspective, pedagogy of the oppressed. And this is what the rationale of the... Now, it is not that, I'm drawing theoretical perspective from these classical thinkers, Marx, Durkheim, Mills, and sociology of knowledge. But in Indian society also, there are social scientists who have argued that there is a need of different perspective to look the Indian society. And I heavily draw on, again, our two founding members of this center. Professor Singh, Y. Singh, has argued that an important ideological perspective that has now emerged in the interpretation of deprivation of the scheduled caste is the traditional Brahmanical model for the interpretation. Now, I'm not using the term Brahmanical. It is used by a Thakur, that is Professor Y. Singh. He says that, and there is an attempt to justify caste exploitation and oppression. The traditional cultural ideology, therefore, needs to be inverted in order to evolve an objective methodological perspective to study the Indian society and scheduled caste in particular. This is Y. Singh. Professor Uman argues that if experience and knowledge are inextricably linked in social sciences, then the location of the knowledge producer, the researcher, in social structure is crucial from the perspective of production of knowledge. That is why perspective from below is necessitated due to politics of location. The process of production of knowledge and the advantage emanating from one's location is in the social structure are invariably interlinked. Now, these are, few examples, but, very recently, S.M. Dahiwale, who talked about that how, political, how different social reformers from belonging to Dalits and backward categories like Ambedkar, Chhatrapati Sahu, Phule, Periyar, all have to be clubbed in together, and out of that a perspective has to be evolved, and that is he calls as non-Brahmanical perspective. In the same way, Brij Ranjan Mani has also argued that better understanding of socio-religious world and the caste ideology can be had from understanding a alternative understanding of Indian history. And this has to clear the cobwebs of the fictions and misunderstanding that have been woven around the Veda and Vedic religion. Hence, there are enough evidences to argue that there is a need for Dalit perspective. So what is then Dalit perspective? I have tried to argue what is Dalit and where there is a need. Now, I just take a few minutes to explain this what do I mean by Dalit perspective? Now, Webster's dictionary talks about what is perspective, and perspective means a specific point of view in understanding and judging things or events. So there is a specific point of view, and therefore, according to Dalit perspective, or accordingly, Dalit perspective is a specific point of view to understand and analyze the social reality empirically. Now, this point of view emanates from unique trajectory of experiences and consciousness of millions of Dalits, shaped because of their, I told you, because of their structural location, because of their suffering, cumulative exclusion, because of approximately a millennium old history of exclusion, collective identity, and because of their unalterable collective identity. And because of these 5-6 characteristics, there is a unique construction of consciousness. And out of this unique construction of consciousness, the production of knowledge has started taking place. Now, once that has taken place, then there need to be also functions of Dalit perspective. So, I've tried to, evolve, or I've tried to register here 4 functions of Dalit perspective, and there may be many other, but as with my own limitations, I could only. It tries to understand, the first function, it tries to understand and analyze the existing socio-political reality about the Dalit themselves. And this it does from both book view and field view. What is this position? It started with that only. How they exist in the society. This was the beginning point. And second, it tries to understand and analyze the reality about the Dalit established by other social scientists. How the other social scientists have tried to look into. And third, it tries to understand and analyze the existing socio-political reality about the society as a whole. And fourth, it gives us a broad framework to understand Dalit society, that is within society. Now, coming to the field view, Dalit perspective, field view or book view and field view, we all know that book view of any society is considered to be static. It is considered to be prescriptive and normative. But even then, though it is static, though it is normative and prescriptive, it keeps on returning back into the contemporaneity again and again. And people try to justify their social action by taking leave to this book view. And therefore, it is important to be engaged. Now, what did this book view, Dalit perspective, tries to understand the book view? First, it is, it asks a question that, what is the legitimate position of the Dalits in the Hindu social order? Is there a legitimate place for the Dalits in the Hindu social order? Because we know that Gure and Duma, they have talked about that there are, Vedas talk about 4 varnas, and Smriti says cannot be any 5th. And this has been substantiated by both Gure and Duma. And therefore, Dalit perspective investigates from where this metaphor, 5th varna, comes. Is there a legitimate place? And the second question is that, where does this metaphor, 5th varna, comes? There are 4 varnas only. Why do you? And I think if you read Gure and if you read Duma, they'll say there are 4 varnas and there's 5th also. But nobody tells where does this fifth comes. Now, therefore, the Dalit perspective investigates from where does the fifth Varna originate. If the canonical texts have not accounted for fifth, then how can there be? Further, Dalit perspective also underlines that even if we accept book view as given to us by the anthropologists and sociologists and Dalits as fifth Varna, then the Hindu social order, there is a problem. And the problem is that Varna, Ashram, Dharma, that is the full schema of the Hindu social order. Varna, Ashram, Dharma. That means normally there are 4 classes, there are 4 Varnas, and the 4 Varnas have been given the 4 ashramas, and they have to follow the dharma, the duties within each ashrama. So if there is no dharma, there is no Varna for the Dalits, so which ashrama will they follow? And which dharma they will follow? There is no answer coming from the canonical text. And therefore, there is a question. It asks whether Hindu social order is a reality or is it a construct? It is a handiwork of certain sociologists. Although Dalits have struggled over the years to argue for an independent inhabitants of this land, original inhabitants of this land, Adi Hindu, Adi Dravid, Adi Karnataka, Adi Andhra, all these movements, Adi Hindu, Adi Dharma, they are all the movements which have tried to highlight and argue that, Dalits have been the original inhabitants of this land, and yet they have been subsumed in the Hindu social order. And therefore, there is a larger question that this meta-narrative of Hindu social order, where does this fifth Varna come? If this is the book view, what about the field view? Dalit perspective tries to understand the field view. And, of course, some empirical evidences can be understood. I will take only a very celebrated category in Indian sociology, and that is village, Indian village. An Indian village, if you see social science, sociologist after sociologist, whether it is Srinivas, whether it is Bete, or whether it is even Weissing, all have gone to villages to study Indian village. That was the field view. And of course, the perspective which dominated to understand Indian villages was functionalist perspective. And we all know that functionalist perspective, the caste system is dovetailed in Jajmani system, and Jajmani system gives every caste an occupation, and therefore there is total solidarity within the Indian villages. And of all, Metcalfe is quoted again and again. Metcalfe argues that Indian villages are a small republic, and Mahatma Gandhi wanted Gram Swaraj. Now, if that is the reality, tried to be, understood by the mainstream sociologists through their fieldwork. Now, the question which Dalit perspective asks, that why did this functionalist perspective, why this study of Indian villages through functionalist perspective? And, therefore, it goes and asks, what was the locale of the study? Where did the researchers, Bete, M.N. Srinivas, A.M. Shah, Weissing, where did they live for performing their fieldwork, for doing their fieldwork? An answer is that they did not. They lived only in upper caste bastis, the agraharams. And, social scientists like M.N. Srinivas, Bete, A.M. Shah, all have accepted where they live. I think you can read Field and the Field Workers. They have candidly accepted also. They never knew that this will be critically analyzed and reflected upon. So, their studies become partial. Their studies on the Indian villages become partial because they have not stayed in Bastis, Adi Dravida colonies, Mala Bastis or Madiga Bastis or the Chamrautis where the Dalits live. And why do I say so? Because when the people growing in these Bastis, when they started writing, there's a stark difference. And that is here I bring in biographies and autobiographies. Biographies and autobiographies give me a lot of strength to argue a case that look how the realities understood and explained by the mainstream sociologists, mainstream perspective of sociology is totally bereft of the reality. Now it is here when Ambedkar was trying to argue what Ambedkar wrote about Indian village. He argued, Charles Metcalfe was talking about the villages are small republics, and Ambedkar argues that in this republic there is no place for democracy, there is no place for equality, liberty and fraternity. The Indian village is very negation of republic. Now people are talking about solidarity, and here he's saying that negation of liberty, equality and fraternity. Not only that, Parthamma writes, Srinivas seems to be firmly committed to the equilibrium model of Radcliffe Brown and Durkheim. The principle of village solidarity in day-to-day life is often governed by conflicting interests, so that both intercaste as well as intracaste relationships are marked by changes. Solidarity at best is temporary and situational. Now there are, still other social scientists like Joe Arrow has talked about, has portrayed very recently that how, when you start looking Indian village from Cherry, how does it look? And he says that the Dalits still do not wear shirts, and even when they meet the higher caste of the village, they remove their towel from the shoulder in respect. In the same vein, elderly Pariyar women do not wear blouse and sandals in front of the higher caste. Even today, this is 2010 study. Ramaiah also points out this. And then I come to biography. There are many biographies, but two very important biographies which I think that they have given very vivid description of villages where they lived. And I quote, one is Om Prakash Valmiki. Om Prakash Valmiki argues, and I quote, on the edge of the pond, there are the homes of churas. All the women of the village would sit behind these homes at the edge of the pond and take a shit. There was muck strewn everywhere, the pigs wandering in the narrow lanes, naked children, dogs, daily fight. This was the environment. If the people who call caste system as an ideal sociological arrangement had to live in this for a day or two, would change their mind. Tulsiram, another, this biography of Valmiki is from Western UP. Tulsiram gives you biography from Eastern UP. And he says that Murdaiya was multi-purpose workplace for our village, Dharampur. Murdaiya was lifeline of our Dalit Basti. Murdaiya does not differentiate between human beings and animals. It is the place, Murdaiya is a place where the dead of the village are burnt or buried. Murdaiya especially gives a struggling dogs, vultures and jackals on the flesh of the dead animals. This makes a very, very a very artful place, and that's what his, biography argues. Now, from Punjab, Madhavpuri talks, Balbir Madhavpuri, in his biography, Chhangya Rukh, autobiography, talks about that in Punjab, which is considered to be, not caste is not there, or because there are Punjabis, caste system is not there. He says that the sources of water for each caste in Punjab were different. And the Jats, when saw the Dalits, if he is well dressed, would bring mud and put on their head, so that how can he look so beautiful, so clean and neat? A Dalit should be only looking, dirty. That was the way he grew. This is 1960s and 60s and 70s when our social scientists were producing. So there are a string of biographies which will tell you the village is not that, functionalists have tried to argue that it is dovetailed, it is solidarity prone, and everyone is, looking after each other. Even in the Jajmani system, how the Kamins and the lords will play their role, I think that is a very, very important argument to look into. So the book view and the field view, through the Dalit perspective, gives a very different way to understand Indian society. Last point of the paper is that how we can observe Dalits, how Dalit perspective has tried to look Dalits. Till now, Dalits were only approached through untouchability, illiteracy, atrocity, and then policy. That was the way they were observed. But this Dalit perspective tries to look into three broad parameters or three broad categories. One, it tries to understand Dalits through their internal social categories, like Dalit women, Dalit youth, Dalit icons, and Dalit diaspora. Second, it tries to understand Dalit through their institutions, like caste. What is caste for them? Religion. What is their religion? Political parties, NGOs, and literature. And third, it tries to understand through the processes, like movements, like the process of modernization and globalization. So this gives us a broad frame, a very new way to enter in the Indian society, not through a perspective from above, where you stick and relate only to the Varna hierarchy. Here, people from the below, they are trying to understand Indian society gradually. And it is in this context, they try to highlight that how they have been understood and how they have been stigmatized, how they have been a victim of reductionism, stigmatization, as well as blackout. Yeah. So, friends, therefore, what I'll do is I run very fast here. That each category, for example, Dalit women. Indian social scientists have this tendency to evolve a homogenized whole of everything, and in that they are the center. They have a meta-narrative in which they are the center and others are referred. But this perspective tries to deconstruct that homogenized whole and try to understand the intricacies within that homogenized whole. And therefore, to begin with, Dalit woman is not a homonolithic whole, as has been pronounced by mainstream social scientists. And therefore, they say that if Indian woman is exploited on the basis of gender and class, Dalit woman is triply exploited. And they go on to say that the Dalit girls are, exploited on 4 pretexts. Even age is also included. So, gender, class, and caste. And, why are they different? Of course, there are, actually I've already defined because of their structural location, but they're also different because of this structural location, the occupation and the type of stereotyping they have suffered, the type of ridicules they have suffered. I have tried to list here at least three broad identities which Dalit women have been given. One was, of course, Devdasis. Devdasis, Dais, the midwife. They have played the role of midwives, fine. Devdasis, Dayans, witches. There's a great tradition of witches in the Indian villages, and they are the people who, the Dalit women are the sufferers of this whole humiliation. And of course, there are ridicules which are there, which exist, and try to understand the Indian society. I'm not going into detail, but one thing is important for me to understand is that the sexual exploitation of Dalit women has not been understood by the mainstream social scientists, and they have tried to label it as if that it is another sexual assault. But when I start analyzing through Dalit perspective, I look at that sexual assault on the Dalit woman is not only a sexual act, but it is a caste act as well. And there are 5 reasons to prove. 1, how untouchable becomes touchable. If it is only that, then how this untouchable woman is for other purposes untouchable, but this sexual assault. Second, the rape of a Dalit woman or sexual assault on the woman is not an individual activity. It is more than often found that it is a group activity. And it happens, that is related, the third aspect, it happens when violence is perpetrated by the so-called upper caste on the Dalit bastis. Dalit bastis are attacked. And it is during this violence, the fourth element comes, that age doesn't deter the assaulter. And they commit the heinous crime with the 70-year-old woman and 7-year-old girl. The fifth, the sexual act are committed at the time when the Dalits assert their legitimate constitutional rights. And we can add one more, and that is, it is committed to shatter the morale of the community. And therefore, I think sexual assault on the Dalit woman has to be understood very differently. Similarly, we have not understood the icons of the Dalits, and icons have been only reduced as Dalit icons, as if they have not contributed into the development of the Indian society, and the whole notion, the whole privileging of the mainstream social thinker or social reformers like Gandhi, Nehru, Tagore, Vivekananda, Aurobindo, they have been privileged in place of these icons, which have contributed in the humanity for the development of different types of human rights of the marginalized sections, and thereby they have tried to question the whole Hindu social order. I will take another example of diaspora. Indian diaspora again is considered to be a monolithic whole where caste does not exert. And most of the time when we read these, texts on the Indian diaspora, it is only sari, curry, Taj Mahal, and whatnot. That is what the India is projected as. And that is also celebrated outside. And I've tried to look into 10 films, Indian films, how especially catering to British diaspora, British Indian diaspora, where we are talking about how from Purab Paschim to Singhis King, how the identities have evolved. But we do not find any description of caste in these films. Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gam, Millionaire, Riding with Ferrari, and a full mafia, Singhis King, of course, that is there. But we do not find anything. But we are aware of that in London, in at Heathrow or in in other places, or Jackson Heights, we find that how these whole Gurdwaras, Ravidasi Gurdwaras have mushroomed. Why? Because people were denied access to the Gurdwaras of the mainstream, and then the celebrations in the, especially I like to name that how burst of Baba Saheb Ambedkar in 9 universities. From 9 universities of the world, Ambedkar is celebrated with his burst. London School of Economics, Columbia University, Brandeis University, Boston, Massachusetts, and then we have York University, we have Simon Fraser University, and in Japan, Koisana University, in Australia, Melbourne University. All universities have started having this, and celebration of Ambedkar's anniversary, birth anniversary in consulate have really given a very different visibility to the Indian diaspora. Now this is the categories of the Dalits you can understand. What about the institution? How Dalit perspective is giving you a framework to understand caste. Caste is an institution which talks about that caste with 6 categories. Ghore has given 6 categories, then 5 categories by M.N. Srinivas, and Bete also adds notice caste and class. But Ambedkar refuted these whole theories of caste, especially, and theories of origin of caste. I think a very profound point which he makes is that endogamy is the only characteristics of caste. Rest are, afterthought. So we cannot take those characteristics as the real characteristics. And second, he is basically trying to argue that the hierarchy is not a normal hierarchy. As given by Juma, that hierarchy is a normal hierarchy. In normal hierarchy, people are laid on one of the other, and you can break and go, and you can climb the ladder, and you can dismantle the hierarchy and create a new hierarchy. But this hierarchy he calls about it's a graded inequality hierarchy, where actually the topmost position is held by someone. There is another one below that. The person wants to go up the ladder, but he will not allow the lower to come to his equal. And therefore, it is graded inequality which has its own mechanism which keeps it going. So the lower wants to come at the topmost, but they will not allow the lowest to come to his level. And therefore, there is a very novel way to understand Indian hierarchy system, which did not exist within the mainstream social studies. Dalit perspective also claims, the religion, the Hindu religion, how they have questioned the Hindu religion, and they have tried to argue that we have our own gods, we have our own social reformers, and that is why we are not part of the Hindu social order. And they converted. They went into Buddhism, they went into Sikhism, they went into Islam and Christianity, and that's the way they started having their own way. Now these are the institutions with which we can really understand that how in Indian society the diversity has been suppressed and homogeneity is being highlighted. And once we start understanding these intricacies, I think we get a very different perspective to understand Indian society. Now, I will not take much of your time. The only thing, the other institution is again, I think, important, and this institution is politics, Dalit politics. People have not tried to look into the Dalit political parties. They have tried to only analyze Congress, Bharatiya Janata Party, and the others. But they have never tried to look into the Dalit leadership, how they have contributed into the maintenance of Indian democracy, how they have contributed into the maintenance of democracy and thereby the process of nation building. Why I try to argue is that because there is a stigma attached to this political mobilization that they have created casteism, they have created caste animosity. I want to argue that I try to differentiate, or Dalit perspective tries to differentiate between casteism and caste assertion. Casteism is a negative term which tries to monopolize the institutions. They try to monopolize resources, and therefore they try to exclude the other groups from becoming part of it. That is casteism. So ism is a process by which the dominant groups try to exclude the lesser people. But caste assertion is a process by which the excluded try to ask for their legitimate rights enshrined in the constitution. Now, when the Dalits practice this assertion, they are called as they are practicing casteism. Oh, they are spreading women of caste. And that's what Bahujan Samaj Party has always been looked upon. I think, therefore, this perspective tries to engage, Dalit politics a very different way. Last but not the least, process. Again, Dalit movement is considered to be a monolithic whole. And that is why, again, the process of reductionism, process of, stigmatization. Oh, Dalit movement is trying to divide the society. It is trying to divide people. It is not, it is not doing anything. And that is reduced only to political, and then it is reduced to reservation. As if Dalit movement is not doing anything else. Now, when I started analyzing this from Dalit perspective, I saw that there are different shades of Dalit movement. And I find it at least 6 or 8 shades of Dalit movement, starting from socio-religious reform movements. They are totally different. Socio-religious reform movement. People are having Ravidas. People are having Kabir. They are Kabir Panthis. They are Ravidasis. They are Chokhamelites. And they are trying to organize along with that. Armaiti Desai said that, okay, this mobilization are fine, but they are not, giving any institutions to hold on to their movement, and therefore they are not very emancipatory in nature. So, social-religious reform, political movement. I have just talked about that, how political parties have emerged, political movement. Then literary movements. The literature movement is an independent movement. It is not associated with any political party. It has rather given birth to political parties. And then fourth is the Dalit bureaucratic movement. The bureaucrats are running their own movement, BAMSEF. And they have become so powerful that they produced a political party, Bahujan Samaj Party. They are the people who produced it. And they still actually. So BAMSEF, and then the Dalit NGO movements. NGO movements has like NCDHR, National Campaign for Dalit Human Rights, and NACDOR. They have not now taken the fight of the Dalit human rights from local to global. And they have approached to supra institutions like United Human Rights Commission or Committee. And they are trying to go to the different social forums, World Social Forum or European Social Forum, Asian Social Forum, and to highlight the, the human right violations of the Dalits. And therefore, they are a very different league altogether. And you know that how they have been attacked right now. The Dalit diaspora movement, I have just told that there is another. Now there is a youth movement, Dalit youth movement, which, looked very, very shallow. And it is related and situated to universities. But after this whole, information revolution with Facebook, with Twitter, and with websites, now I see that this youth movement is writ large at a pan-India level, and they have connectivity. They do not only are restricted to only to the universities, but they have started now connecting themselves at the all India society level. And therefore, there is a very different type of mobilization, different way of assertion which we are observing. Now, if we approach Indian society from this perspective, then I think many established concepts, theories, as well as observations stand deconstructed. And there is a new insight to understand Indian society. Thank you.